The following is a special presentation of the Not Quite Right podcast, in which we discuss, in detail, entries to our erotic flash fiction competition, the Not Quite Right prize for flesh fiction. This episode contains adult themes and is not appropriate for listeners under the age of 18. And Mum, if you're still listening, that's on you.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
Amanda, it's time to get literary. Or maybe...
Sorry, what was that?
Maybe cliterary. This is the Podium episode for the Literary Erotica category.
So tell me what that means. What does that mean?
So this is the Literary Erotica category of the Not Quite Right prize for flesh fiction. And we'll be reading out the second place story. Very sexy story. Looking forward to it. And we'll also be revealing the third place for this category. We won't be revealing the first place, the winner, quite yet.
No.
So we'll have to wait a little bit longer, but that will all be revealed in the final episode of the series. But for now, there's plenty to talk about. We'll talk about our experiences with this category, and we'll also be speaking to our guest judge for this category, who is Elise Scott. And Elise has helped us out so much in this comp, judging several categories. And so we'll be getting Elise's thoughts on this category very shortly.
Yeah, and Elise had some interesting insights based on a little bit of life experience as well, which we talked about in our chat. I certainly had my eyes opened through Elise's comments, and Elise's comments were always very generous, very well considered, and very thought-provoking for me. So I found Elise to be an incredibly helpful judge. And of course, volunteering time for this job. Of course, this competition was free to enter. And so all of our guest judges volunteered their time, and we are so appreciative of that. And of course, it was incredibly fun to read these stories, but it was also a huge time commitment. So we're very, very grateful to Elise for that.
And Elise has a book coming out very shortly called The Black Cat Detectives. And we're very excited to be giving a copy of that away to Elise's top pick for this category. And so let's hear from Elise now. So welcome back, Elise, and thanks for joining us again. I know we've taken up your time for the fourth time, I think, now. But thank you so much for helping us with the reading. And one of the categories that you read was Literary Erotica. So tell us a little bit about your experience with that category.
Well, specifically with literary erotica, I tend to write upmarket, although the book that I have coming out is not upmarket, but I tend to write upmarket or literary leaning prose. And I actually, as a writer, I cut my teeth writing poetry and studying it, not like formally in like a graduate program or anything, but I get really excited about experimental form and about the structure and flow of sentences. I have one of my favorite books on craft is called Rhetorical Grammar, Grammatical Choices, and Rhetorical Effects. And it explores stuff like how when you shift word order, it changes the music of a sentence. So I get excited about stuff on a sort of micro craft level. And I think that was a big piece of what was informing me as I explored the literary erotica.
And I think when we created this category, it was coming from a place of allowing a little bit more of that exploration of, I guess, maybe not one of the standard erotic genres that you really, I was going to say come across, but I'll choose my words.
Pay the
we still
jar.
got coins.
Yeah.
That you encounter, let's say. And I think we did get that. We did get in this category some more exploration of not just like form, although there was form, there was a bit of poetry, but even just like different emotional resonances, you know, erotic, but not in a positive way, not in a happy way, maybe exploring the darker side and maybe exploring things like different kinds of voices. Stream of consciousness, for example, was one that we saw a few of. So I'm glad that we had that opportunity for people to break out into something a little bit different. So how did you find this category overall? And were there any standouts for you in terms of the stories?
There were, yeah. I really enjoyed this category. It was one of those where I never knew what I was going to find when I opened up a story. I think more so than a lot of the others, because to me, literary is more about either the prose or the form and less about the content itself. And so, you know, you could have something in literary erotica that was also kink and taboo or also fantasy and supernatural. So it was fun. There was even a really funny one in there at one point, I think. So it was fun to have that sort of pick and mix experience. And some of the writing didn't really land for me, but I mean, even those that didn't, I applaud the experimentation and the exploration. And some of it really did. And in fact, I think my favorite story in the whole, well, I can't say in the whole competition because I only read 4 categories, but of the ones that I read, my favorite story of all was in the literary erotica category.
Okay, well, we'll get to that in a moment because you'll give us your top pick. But were there any other stories that you wanted to call out?
So there was a story called A Little Leprosy. That was a beautifully rendered story, I thought. And it really reminded me of a book that I read called Molokai that's actually about the location and the situation that this story is about.
Yeah, it was kind of like a historical fiction story and a fascinating take on the theme, making the unsexy irresistible, so making leprosy into something that was incredibly irresistible. I found that very compelling, a really fascinating take. But as you say, it's based on a real place and no doubt, to some extent at least, a real experience that people have had. So, you know, feeling very othered and feeling quarantined, I guess, and with a illness that at the time was not well understood, and I guess fighting back against, you know, the oppressive forces that would have them quarantined.
I recall in one of your old episodes, you talked about how you appreciate it when a writer builds on or kind of acknowledges work that's come before. And this, for me, this landed that way. It felt like adding to the oeuvre, if you will. Sounds a little pretentious, but there you go.
Yeah, so that story, A Little Leprosy, definitely a memorable story, and that was by Drea Muller.
So there were 2 lines in that story. So one of them is, "You called me a summer cyclone, coming at you from all angles, all directions, so desperate I was almost brutal. And you were like the thirsty earth, parched and greedy for me. Your scars split more than once. I begged your forgiveness, which of course you gave." And then my other one that I had was, "I ran my fingers up your thigh during the opening hymn, slowly, inviting a tongue of hellfire with every inch I traveled over your trousers."
Spicy.
Yeah. And so much characterization is happening in that moment, too. There are so many layers there because there's the sexy piece, there's the religious piece, there's the sort of beauty of the hymn.
I'm just recalling now, I've just looked it up, Elise, that we did an interview a couple of years ago now with Eleanor Limprecht at Words on the Waves. And Eleanor has written a story called The Coast, which similarly dealt with this kind of idea of leprosy and islands and quarantine. And it didn't quite go there in terms of the erotic aspect, but it's obviously a topic that fascinates people and incredibly interesting and othering to, I guess, suggest that people should stay on this island and not relate to anybody else on the mainland. So fascinating topic. Were there any other stories that stood out in your mind?
There was one that was just, the person created a new genre. It was like NSFW erotica.
Oh, that one actually, for your interest, they withdrew their story.
Really?
Yeah, they emailed us partway through and said, "I'm withdrawing my story because it's getting published in some monster sex anthology somewhere." I'm like, well,
interesting.
Like, you don't really have to withdraw it. But anyway, they did. But yes, that one was probably, and there were other themes that were more shocking, but that story was probably the most shocking story.
Yes. Yeah. I think I put it in my list, and I had a lives rent free in my head smiley face, and then I had like a lives rent free in my head horror face. And that was my horror face.
Yeah, I have to agree. But like fascinating and very well written. It was absolutely off the wall, in your face, horrifying, which is exactly what they were going for. So big tick in that regard. But yes, very shocking and very disgusting. I will say that. It was disgusting.
It was disgusting. There were also a couple, I think maybe more than in other genres, there were a number of stories that explored the relationship between desire and shame in really interesting ways. There was one in particular where the story is about a sexual encounter with a person that the narrator has chosen to be with and finds absolutely repulsive. But the whole encounter is like a sort of penance because of internalized shame about his identity.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
I remember feeling like that was a really huge thing to try to tackle in 1,500 words and fairly well achieved. Like, it was a pretty evocative, it was beautifully written. And it was disconcerting, wildly disconcerting to read.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then-
we had this in like across the board, really, where there were stories that were really quite challenging to read, but which were fascinating and interesting character studies and people dealing with their own self-identity and so on that were not pleasant, but fascinating and well written. That was a good example of that.
I was really, I think maybe overly picky in the awarding of favorites. I think I only marked 3 stories as favorites in all of the 4 categories.
And they were all mushroom stories, weren't they, Elise?
So, Elise, you're about to reveal your top pick. And before we do, your top pick gets a copy of your latest book. So tell us a little bit about that book.
So the book is called The Black Cat Detectives, and it stars 3 kittens who, I don't know if I mentioned this before in other segments, but they can subtly bend the laws of physics. Each kitten has
I don't think you did mention that.
You did not mention that, and that is an important, crucial detail.
Oh wow. Fun fact. Each kitten has a different area of physics that they can sort of subtly manipulate. And I base that on like this feeling I often have that my cats have the ability to predict the pattern of fall of a thing they push over the edge of a counter or whatever. But, so it's 3 kittens who can subtly bend the laws of physics, and they are rescued by a stage magician, and then they have to solve a murder that she is accused of committing so that they can save her from being sent to the human pound forever. So it's a cozy murder mystery.
So cozy mystery, and we've talked about it already, but what defines a cozy mystery?
So there's like a little rubric for defining cozy mystery. There are like little boxes you have to tick, and it has to have a amateur sleuth. It has to have relatively lighthearted content, and it has to have no on-page sex or violence or gore, and generally not too like heavy of themes. But in addition, they usually have really engaging settings. So I like to describe the setting of my book as a cross between Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls and the island in Murder, She Wrote, Cabot Cove. It's a fictional island that's based on Block Island, except there's lots and lots of like diversity and stuff. And it's got a sort of town green very similar to Stars Hollow, which, fun fact, is based on the town green in Gilmore Girls is based on the town that I went to high school in, which is right near where I live now.
Okay, so what is the objective of a cozy mystery? Is the idea to just protect people from the gore? Is it an objective to get a broader audience that might include children, for example? What do you see as being kind of the appeal of a cozy mystery over like a straightforward mystery?
That's a really interesting question. I think so. Your point about children is certainly well taken. Like, I'm not sure if that's historically been the intentional objective, but I will say that one of my beta readers is my 8-year-old daughter. She's read the whole book like 3 times and was actually contributory in several spots. She made recommendations or suggested changes. So it's fun because you'll find her in the dedication, and she's also signing mini book plates to give people who pre-register. So there is certainly that piece, but I think the main idea is that sometimes people want to read something that they can kind of relax into and not really worry about running into anything heavy. So it's just like a way to decompress and to find some fun and some joy.
Do you see it as kind of a counterculture to like the Netflix world where everything has got to just be sensationalized and drama upon drama and shock upon shock? Like, are we kind of trying to find a space for the opposite of that as well?
That had not occurred to me, but I really love that idea. That feels right intuitively to me for sure. And I tend to write really dark content. And so for writing this was, for me, a rebellion against that in some ways. But yeah, it does feel like choosing to turn away from the intentionally dark or shocking in search of the joyful and the fun is kind of a powerful move these days, especially, I mean, the whole world, but especially I live in the United States and we've got a lot of darkness going on here right now.
Yeah.
So reaching for joy sometimes all by itself feels like a revolutionary choice.
Absolutely. So let's not tease our listeners any further. Tell us what your top pick was.
So my top pick for Literary Erotica is called Phantasmagoria. And as I said, I think before, it would also be my top pick for the whole competition.
Big call.
Or my portion of it. So it's about a sentient house that sort of slowly devours its inhabitants. Have you read the short story about the yellow wallpaper?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most
Yeah.
famous short stories of all time. And for those who are listening and haven't read it, you absolutely have to Google the yellow wallpaper. Yes.
It's amazing. So this story feels like it builds on that in a lot of really interesting ways and also does some new and interesting things. Plus there's the erotica component.
Yeah, there's the spicy.
It's really hard to, yeah, exactly. It's hard to explain why or how this story is so successful in that way, but for me, it really was.
No, I agree. And that was a memorable story. For me, it recalled also The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. So Elizabeth Gilbert is the author of Eat, Pray, Love. But The Signature of All Things followed a character who was like fascinated by moss and studying moss. But it was like the period of that piece and kind of this interplay between the setting and the character that I found kind of reminded me of that as well. But definitely a very memorable story.
I want to read that now.
I think you'd love it, actually. I think you absolutely should read it.
So the author of Phantasmagoria was Erin Tavaly. So congratulations, Erin. And you'll be getting a copy of Elise's book when it gets released sometime in May, I believe.
Yeah, and so just to be clear too, Elise has written the book, The Black Cat Detectives, under the pen name Kit Gray.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested, you can look that up.
Well, thank you so much for joining us once again, Elise. We'll be hitting you up one last time for the other category very shortly. But thank you so much again, and I will speak to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
And we'll be speaking with Elise again on the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about literary erotica.
So this category received 71 entries, which actually made it the third most popular category, which surprised me, to be honest. I sort of felt like maybe literary erotica might be those fringe stories that sort of were a bit outside the norm. But in fact, you know, we're talking, a sixth of the stories around that sort of mark. Quite a popular category.
Yeah, and it didn't surprise me, actually, because I think it's fun. I think it's interesting to write in different styles. And I guess literary is a interesting category in itself. Like, what does that mean? And really, we're talking about stories that don't fit into a genre and push boundaries in various ways. So we got a lot of different perspectives, different voices, different forms, like poetry and that kind of thing fell into this category. So I think it's one that's really open and allows you to be yourself a little bit more than maybe some other categories that are more genre oriented. I guess, of course, you know, you can be yourself in any category, but there's more options for experimentation in literary. So I did enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of the way the stories were presented, we had a huge variety. We had some sort of very dialogue-heavy stories. We had some stories that were very experimental, and the way the prose was presented was almost just a word or two per line, and not even poetry, but almost stream of consciousness kind of idea as well. And we had some stories that I guess just leaned quite heavily, not so much into poetry, but into that really descriptive, rich prose.
Not purple, but
not purple, but just very focused on setting and just like leaning into that, for example, as opposed to maybe what you might expect more in terms of a plot progressing from beat to beat. It was more that kind of lingering in a moment kind of thing.
Yeah, and I feel literary as well, it's a category that gives the words themselves more weight. Necessarily than some of the other aspects of writing. So like when we're talking about monster sex, it's about the monster. It's all about the pacing that you create and all the characterization around that. All of that stuff is still present in literary or can be, but more weight is given to like the format and the words themselves. But there is still a lot of overlap because literary doesn't mean it's not romantic and it doesn't mean it can't be supernatural or whatever the case may be. So that's one of the things that we found having these categories is a lot of stories could like straddle several categories.
Oh, go on.
Pay it up.
You pay it.
You pay.
You said it. So that's the innuendo jar. Every time we make a little inappropriate joke.
We haven't bothered to count it.
We haven't been counting.
Because it's probably over $100, I would say, because we've just been like...
Just really hammering it. Yeah, and really hammering the jar. Filling it. So I guess you're right, putting more weight onto the language of the story. But I don't know if you agree. I think in some ways that made it difficult to judge this category because once it got to that podium level, on even the long list level, we're starting to think, did this story feel literary?
Yeah.
As well as was it maybe erotic or sexy or a good story, you know, quality piece of fiction or writing that resonated with us. we're trying to decipher, like, is this something more than genre fiction?
Yeah, and that was a consideration for all the categories when it gets to the pointy end. Like, you want the winner especially, but also the podium to be somewhat representative of that category. So yeah, that was a consideration. And what does literary mean? And if it's a great story, does it belong on the literary podium? So we shall see. And so literary, probably one of my favorite categories. I did enjoy like romantic stories as well. And look, there was stories from every category that I enjoyed.
Oh, yeah.
But probably literary, there were several for me that were standouts.
That does not surprise me at all. That feels like your reading style in general. Like, I'm looking at your shelves right now, full of literary fiction.
And I also enjoy like darker stories as well. And I think the literary...
I did know that about you. Yeah.
I think the literary category brought a bit more of that out. And I don't mean dark as in like violent or problematic. I just mean that, negative emotions are also in there, like maybe some sadness or longing or loneliness and that kind of thing. And I think that that has a place in erotic fiction as well. And probably this category, as well as the other category a little bit, were good places for that kind of thing.
One challenge here though, and I think if we're just giving a bit of general feedback to anybody who entered this particular category and who's maybe wondering why they didn't make the long list or waiting to see, what was so special about these stories that beat my story, is that at times, you said there's a bit more emphasis placed on the words and on the prose. And I think sometimes that's at the expense of story. We can for want of a better phrase, we can get up our own butts a little bit on this stuff, and feel like we get caught up in sort of the words and forget our reader sometimes. Yeah. And you do need to consider your reader, particularly in erotic fiction, And any of these categories, the same challenge in literary erotica was that we had to make it sexy, on some level, and there were plenty of times when we're starting with a clever premise of something unsexy and we're going into that territory, but we never quite deliver on making it sexy by the end. It sort of stays problematic throughout or stays in a negative space and never quite gets to that positive, sexy space. And that's the theme. That was the challenge. And you really needed to start unsexy and deliver sexy by the end. So maybe analysing your story from that basis is a place to start.
Yeah. And look, I think we also disagreed, you and I, on some of the stories. And I'm not necessarily only in this category, but also some other categories, but maybe predominantly here, on things where I'm like, well, this is deeply sexy, right? For me, this expresses like longing and lust and all these kind of things that were quite deep. But it also is sad. Like it's also a very sad piece or lonely or that kind of thing. And for you, I think a lot of your comments were like, well, this isn't sexy. Like I'm not into this. It doesn't turn me on kind of thing. But at the same time, like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily turn you on as like, I want to be this person in this situation kind of thing. But it is deeply sexy in the way that like it is filled with that longing and that language and that like emotion. When we say erotic and sexy, those two things aren't necessarily always exactly synonyms. Something can be erotic while being quite dark and not necessarily overtly sexy, right? So I think we disagreed on a few of those things, but that was an interesting conversation, I think, an interesting exploration of these ideas.
And look, I think my own opinions on that sort of changed from time to time, like depending on where we were when we were in the judging process. I agree, being erotic doesn't necessarily mean being sexy, but at the same time, in an erotic fiction competition, that is a huge component of what you're looking for. Yeah. But I think overall, across the categories, the podium and the long list reflects that kind of difference, right? We do have stories that are really hot.
Yeah.
And we have stories that are really dark. We have stories that are messed up. We have stories that are sad. We have a whole range of stuff, and it's not all just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And I think that reflects our collective, as judges, our preference for stories that are moving on some level. And while we had maybe a preference for sexiness and eroticism in this competition, as you might expect, stories which were able to move us and which at least touched on that aspect, maybe not going as deeply into that side of things, were still successful in this competition. So, and look, there were times when I was reading, and of course we were reading over a long period of time, these stories. Sometimes I was more like just looking for, look, what's hot? What's a hot story? Like this is an erotic fiction competition. This needs to be sexy and spicy and make me feel something. And then other times I was more open to, okay, this story just made me feel something at all, and was compelling without necessarily being sexy. And I think I was probably guided by the stories in that regard. Like, if I loved a story, I loved a story, and you kind of try and make an argument to keep it. But yeah, it's a challenge. It was a challenge across this competition. I think some people might be surprised maybe by the lack of sexiness in some of the stories that made the podium. I wonder, because some of them are a little demure and not all super spicy. So.
Yeah. And as always, we had to balance all those elements. So we will be revealing the third and the second place in the podium shortly. But just to say, like, whether you did or did not make the long list for this category, as with every other category, we are looking to publish a lot of these stories, more than made the long list. Some of those stories were hot and not necessarily fitting within the category, and some of them were less hot but deserve to be published within their own right. So we have like a huge range of stories that we loved and that we were very excited for that are outside of the long list and inside of the long list. So we'll be publishing a lot of those. Well, enough of that. Enough foreplay. Let's move on to the main event.
Oh, such a man thing to say.
So the third place winners for this category and all of our categories will win a novel by Nikki Sexx. And I haven't listed these titles out, but I think now might be time to do it.
Do it.
So Nikki Sexx, we have 7 novels to give away, and we'll be giving them out to the third place getters for each category. And they are Accuse, Abuse, What Wendy Wants, Kink, Karma, Fate, and Avenge.
Ooh.
So some intriguing titles there. And if you're interested in the works of Nikki Sexx, please do click on the link in the show notes or go on Amazon and search up Nikki Sexx. I'm sure your eyes will be opened to a whole world of smut. And so the person in third place and the talented recipient of one of those novels is Phantasmagoria by Erin Tavalley. And this one is about a haunted sexy house.
Yeah, imagine going to your local carnival and they've got a sexy house, not just a haunted house. And bit of a tunnel of love situation going on. And this one had a bit of an old-timey vibe to it as well. Yeah. Not just a sexy house, it was very wet. It was a wet, damp kind of house.
Yeah, there was some moistness in the air, that's for sure. But like it's that old trope, I guess, of the haunted house, and the house wants to kill you and the house wants to get you out. In this case, the house wants to get you off.
Yeah, apparently.
It's a nice little twist.
A memorable story, good fun, and an inanimate object, romance.
Yeah.
Yeah, good fun.
So well done, Erin, on your story. You'll be getting a copy of one of those Nikki Sexx titles. But now let's move on to second place. And the second place, as always for these categories, does win some interesting prizes. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And for the Literary Erotica category, they win a bottle of wine, courtesy of Naked Wines, our friends at Naked Wines. We love you, Naked Wines. Send us more wine.
Please send more wine.
And from our friends at Odyssey Toys.
Yeah.
We love you too.
Special
Please
friends.
send Amanda more grinders. Odyssey Toys are creators of fantasy adult toys of various varieties. We encourage you to go on our website onto the Flesh Fiction page and check out the prizes. There's a lot of images there of some of the interesting offerings from Odyssey Toys. But what our second place recipient will be getting is a Tenox tentacle grinder.
Oh.
A classic tentacle grinder. If you've ever wanted to grind a tentacle,
and who
now's a
hasn't?
chance.
Let's be honest. Come on, everybody, this is a safe space.
So a huge congratulations to our second place getter and that person. Let's reveal them now.
And in second place for the Literary Erotica category for the Not Quite Right prize for Flesh Fiction is A Little Leprosy by Drea Mala.
The Board of Health frowns upon our love. From a distance, of course. They would have fewer misapprehensions about us if they ever actually visited. But they stay far away, comfortably insulated from what they imagine us to be. Rotting, falling apart as we stagger along the margins of our colony. They have deep concerns about the lovemaking in particular. Companionship, they could countenance. But all that friction. I think they're worried that a little leprosy might botch up the plan to join our islands with the mainland of the United States next year. Might make the politicians nervous that their new paradise has been defiled. Maybe they fret about having to budget for a park ranger to pick up after us. The details they might have to include on the requisition form. A frill of foreskin to be plucked from between the tide pools, like a lost ring of calamari. Labia to be sorted from the black-lipped pearl oysters clinging to the pilings of the docks. We make it a game. Where will they find a bit of us next? Are those my breasts mounded up under the palms, or merely discoloured coconuts? Are those seashells on the sandcastles, Tom? Or have you lost your fingernails? We caress the pale sand, the grains sticking to and falling from our palms at random. Is this your dandruff, Mary? You ask. We laugh and twine our fingers and watch the sunset. The sun goes down so quickly here. It hangs fat in the air all day and then kneels down, languid over the waves, pregnant and flushed, couched on its smoky cloud banks, teasing the tourists' cameras, first on Maui, then here and Lanai, then stretching over to Oahu, really milking it, our own celestial gypsy Rose Lee. And then it's going. It blows a kiss, a sizzling pink ripple on the horizon. Gone, folks. Show's over. Big deal. It's just the sun. Anyone can see it anywhere. For something not of this earth, it couldn't be more mundane. And still, we watch its predictable performance every evening, like we're tourists here ourselves. We sat together in the chapel after today's sunset. You like the evening vespers. I like the darkness of the last row, the way the high backs of the wooden pews hide our hands and laps. I scooted myself close to you, hip to hip. I ran my fingers up your thigh during the opening hymn, slowly, inviting a tongue of hellfire with every inch I travelled over your trousers. I've never been religious. I'm not afraid. In the eyes of the Board of Health, there's not much of either of us that can even be saved. By the time we were kneeling, my hand was covering you like a fig leaf. When the new nun, the little one who still looks terrifically nervous to have been sent to us, led us in the final blessing, you groaned, "Oh, Mary," enshrined tightly into my palm. Maybe we fooled her into thinking guttural prayers are yet another hallmark of the disease. Maybe she doesn't know my name is Mary. In any case, she was surprised enough to slip up and said in her little shaking voice, "God is in love with you." I can't stop thinking about it. When I first arrived, I had only a few telltale patches, enough to eject me from my home and everything I knew. but too few to be met with pity here. Would I be accepted by the lepers? Would I fit in among the doomed? It makes me laugh now, remembering how I worried. No one even noticed me, except for you. You had to plead with me to be gentle. While you were not a virgin, little here is taboo, as well you know. It had been so long since anyone had touched you. Even the physicians let you mark your own height. Hold the stethoscope to your own chest as they listen from a short but significant distance. You called me a summer cyclone, coming at you from all angles, all directions, so desperate it was almost brutal. And you were like the thirsty earth, parched and greedy for me. Your scars split more than once. I begged your forgiveness, which of course you gave. You've been here your whole life. You wear the most visible symptoms. The scarring and scabbing, the bumps and gnarls, the protuberances and pockmarks. You are the worst case on the island. Your life, a daily miracle. It is time for me to admit to you, Tom, that I first sought you out because I thought I had nothing left to live for. And I thought that by being with you, by rubbing my cursed body against yours, I could make myself worse. I could escape the shame of being cast out of my life forever and quickly. More and more of my body has lost feeling over time, desensitized by the rosy welts that cover almost all of me now, like plates of an unwanted armour. But I feel everything with you. I bury my face against the cords of your neck and see that sun, so obscenely round, an orange about to burst from its rind, setting and rising, rising and setting behind my eyelids. How I loved fucking you in the chapel, finding you in your solitary prayers and pressing down onto you, riding your gnarled knees in the back pews, sucking your fingers in the confessional booth, urging you to bend me over the altar under the ecstatic Christ on his crucifix, eyes rolled skywards, mouth slackened into a lascivious "Oh." It is true that our disease was once a death sentence, a damnation, but only of a sort, an administrative demise. In the Dark Ages, you and I would have received a funeral procession, a shovelful of earth at our feet, and, if we were lucky, a prayer to speed us on our way to the grave. We are unclean, so we would go unseen by the state. No business contracts, no private property. All our possessions would have been transmuted into someone else's belongings or burned in a cleansing pyre. Forget about holding public office. Forget about a marriage certificate. We would have been notarized by the welts on our skin and consigned to oblivion. But even then, people like us found each other. They lived. They loved. They carried on. They saved each other. God is in love with you. Christ healed the lepers, didn't he? 10 of them at once on the road to Jerusalem. I imagine Christ embracing those men in Palestine, taking them by the hands and pressing his face against their sores, burying his lips in the matted heat of their hair, saying, "Go and be healed." Maybe Jesus wanted a little leprosy for himself. If your main role in life is to first feel what man feels, all the pain, the confusion, the despair and neglect, and then to die. If you know your time is running out, it could be nice to go a little numb, to slip into a quiet little paradise on earth among the damned. Maybe the sister meant what she said. Maybe God really is in love with us, as much as we are in love with each other. It's a pleasurable thought as our love slips towards an inevitable horizon. It basks in the torpor of the late afternoons. It sizzles into the hour after dusk, when we roll together on 2 cots pushed to touch, or under the palms, or in the shade of the sheer rock cliffs above the sea. We are burning with sweat and sand. Our bodies a confusion of lips and fissures. We dare the superintendent to find us out and write us up. We close our eyes to any eyes that might be watching us. We make the most ravishing and most ordinary spectacle any 2 people can make. 2 imperfect bodies in love. They say your prognosis is not good, Tom. That your miracle might run out soon. That you might not live to see Hawaii become the 50th state. Soon, when I hold your hand to watch the sunset, you'll not be able to hold mine in return. I have become so insensitive to pain, but I fear the ache of losing you more than any hurt I have ever known. Even if my whole body, my whole heart was deadened under leprosy's shroud, I know I would feel that wound. I can only hope Jesus himself welcomes you as you welcomed me here, the first time I found the courage to meet your eyes, the first time I felt saved by someone else's gaze. I tunnel my toes into the sand. Hot and gritty is your kiss. And remind myself how much of this beach, this place, this heart of mine is made of you. I put my hands together and pray.
So thank you so much, Drea Malla, and congratulations on your second place in the Literary Erotica category. I have to point out that Ed's gotten a little emotional here.
That was a very emotional story, and especially trying to read it, and such a beautiful story. And I was saying about how, sadness can be very powerful in erotica, and I think it is here because it's a sad story, but also one that speaks to like a profound love. And like from a storytelling perspective, from a writing perspective, it is very literary, obviously, but it has those many themes coming together, like the idea of the sunset and the sunset of their lives, and the idea of Jesus and the lepers, and trying to find faith in the situation as well. It's all very powerful. I think a very profound story.
Yeah, and I mean, throughout this story, there was a lot of that erotic language sort of built into it from the very beginning. And it's interesting. You read this story. It was a female main character here. I was not doing it justice, so we decided to pass the task over to you. I think you did a wonderful job, but I don't think it mattered. I think that same feeling came through, this sort of deep longing, the sadness and the loss. But it's interesting because I guess, we think in like a romantic sense that it's got to be the two who are meant to be together and they were just perfect for each other and they're soulmates. Like in this situation, it feels much more like they are both just in the same circumstances and they've been drawn together through their circumstances more so than maybe, it was always meant to be. And it's kind of this sense of you and me, we're the same.
Yeah.
As opposed to you and me, we're meant to be out of all the people in all the world kind of thing. And we understand each other. We see each other. When I first arrived on the island, you were the one who saw me. And I think that's something that a lot of people desire. I mean, I think that's something that you see a lot of in online talk about, I feel seen. This is a phrase that comes up time and again, people feeling seen. And there's something about that is so deeply needed by humans, to be seen and understood and loved for who we are, and not kept at arm's length like the government officials were doing in this story.
It's just this idea as well of finding something beautiful in an awful situation. And I mean, not to be flippant, but this is something that a lot of people go through, and I'm saying not to be flippant just because I'm imagining like you work in a shitty workplace and you meet someone also in that shitty workplace and you connect over how shitty that workplace is. This is obviously much more than that, but it's still that desire to find something beautiful in that circumstance. And I think what drives this home really and gives it the impact is the wonderful prose and the way that all of these themes come together. And I think it's super interesting that it's wrapped up in this scene in Hawaii, because it's the end of their relationship, but also Hawaii becoming a state and like the end of that era and all of the things that go along with it from the perspective of like the native peoples. There's a lot in this story. It's one of those stories that really wraps up a lot of themes and throws them out there in a way that works really well, and great entry into the literary category, in my view.
And look, I think even though this is very clearly expressed in a particular time and place, it does feel very universal as well. And I can see some threads of this that remind me of the second place story in the erotic comedy category, in My Friend Tommy, the story about the ostomy bag. What I loved about this was that it did take something very, I think probably we can all agree, leprosy has never been considered sexy. And in the case of Tommy, having an ostomy bag has not ever been considered sexy. But it takes it there. And it's like in 1,500 words only, makes you feel that, makes you feel this character's longing for that, and makes it feel very real and resonant. And I think that's a particular skill. And I think it's done with great care and passion. And it doesn't ever feel forced or like I'm trying to be clever. It feels very much like I'm getting into this character's head and I'm experiencing this as they would. And it comes across as very, very genuine and moving because of that.
Yeah, and they weren't afraid to go there. It wasn't sugarcoating the experience. It was, it emphasizes the pain and how much of this is real leprosy and how much is fiction is, up for debate. But, the fallen off limbs and scrapes and all that kind of thing. The writer here, Drea Mahler, was not afraid to really just go there and go all the way with those descriptions and just the mix of that with like all of the sensual aspects, because that is very sensory and very, pain is a sensation, and all of that mixed in together is very kind of confusing and evocative, and I found it very moving.
And I think there's an element too here of the exaggeration, right? They're sort of saying the officials imagine us kind of falling apart. Right. That doesn't mean we are, but at the same time, when we're together, we're a confusion of mouths and fishes. Like that's a pretty graphic kind of description that you don't know what's someone's mouth and what's a sore they have on their body.
That's fissures, not fishes, as in
not fishes.
Swimming fishes.
Fissures, wounds, open wounds. And that's a powerful, shocking line, but really brings home exactly what this story is about. So incredibly impressive work, a beautiful example of the literary category and something we're absolutely proud to showcase. So thank you so much, Drea, for sharing your talents with us.
So we won't be revealing the winner of the literary erotica category just now. We're going to edge you a little bit longer and we'll reveal that all in the final episode, along with the winners of all of the categories, as well as the overall winner of the Not Quite Right prize for flash fiction.
I'm so excited about that one.
I can't wait for that episode. We're going to be reading 6 excellent stories and
very different too.
Yeah.
A big variety. There's something for everyone.
That's right. But before that, we do have one more category episode, and that's going to be the other category. Interesting one, and we'll talk about that very soon. But until then, right on.
Rot on.
Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Right. Just have to work in a world of mystery. But Ed's back right in the middle. His sixth sense told us we were talking about squirting and he came straight back.
Here for a good squirt. There are some mysteries about the male body as well.
Oh, okay. Like what, for example?
The male G-spot is underexplored, I feel.
Oh, I couldn't tell you all about
or
that.
Just in general?
In general.
Are you talking about the P spot? They call it the P spot.
I have no idea. You tell me.
Yeah, so the P spot, which is sometimes referred to as the male G spot, it's like the rim of the prostate, and it's most easily accessed via like an anal route. But if you massage the rim of the prostate, it will massively increase the output of ejaculate. And for many, 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 maybe even most men, it also significantly increases pleasure. So it's fun times.
Now I'm
spot.
really curious.
If you can be comfortable with involving your anal entry route there with people who are curious but have never experienced it before, I've sometimes had both dramatic output, but also like a dramatic reaction, like shrieking and like, holy shit, I've never experienced anything like this before kinds of things. So it can be pretty great. There are toys that you can get if you don't have anybody that wants to put body parts into your rectum. There are toys. There's ones that vibrate, but I wouldn't recommend starting with that. I would recommend starting with a non-vibrating massager that's specifically designed for anal use in men. And there's one in particular that I really liked because it's like not much bigger than a finger, so it's not overwhelming. And if you're not careful, and if you hit the center of the prostate or if you push too hard, it can be quite uncomfortable.
Okay.
Well, I'll put that on the list of things to do before I die, like things to experience. It's interesting.
Is this a case,
do you know about that, Amanda?
No, I knew about prostate and I don't know. Is it a once you go back entry, you never go back thing? Like if it's that appealing? I don't know. For
some people, maybe, but for a lot of people, it's sort of like vaginal versus oral for women. It's like two different routes to pleasure.
Well,